Hey everyone, it's Matt, and I wanted to take a run at a few of these awesome questions that appeared in response to Education 5040, the lecture we did on equity, diversity, and inclusion, myself and Dr. Hassan Arif. So I'm just going to start with these, breaking these up into a couple of videos to try and chunk it down, I suppose, make it easier to process. Yeah, let's just get to it. So Yunki has asked, how do you assess whether a curriculum is sufficiently diverse and inclusive? And as well, um, how do you judge whether a course is diverse or historically fair? How can teacher education include a variety of points of view while remaining neutral? So I don't think that there's such a thing as neutral curriculum. That's just my opinion. But curricula is set by educators, teachers, pardon me, teacher training programs, which have, of course, their own curricula, and by institutions, and further in tandem with government agencies and groups, which ultimately determine, in public settings at least, what gets taught. So I think, in as much as this is a collaborative relationship and there are established processes in each jurisdiction for creating curricula, I think it's a matter of sort of trusting the process a bit, if I can say that, to the extent that there are various individuals who will necessarily, because of the way that curricula is conceived and delivered, it's just lots of people in the public sector are going to have a hand on it, depending on the context. So I think the multiplicity of viewpoints will help address some of the concerns which you're speaking to there. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. Another question from Hugh. How do you involve parents and the community to promote equality, diversity, and inclusion in the school environment? That's a great question. As a dad, as a parent to two kids who are in Kamloops Public Schools, I can say that there have been really great efforts by our school's principals and also by individual classroom teachers. So my expectation, without having spent a ton of time working K to 12, is that directives are established by the administrative teams and that teachers effectively are carrying those out and adding to that. So hence communication via email, hence communication via class and school-wide newsletters, and also things like just elements within a learning management system like Google Classroom or the G Suite of applications. So all of these things are contributing factors to that kind of messaging. And school teams and committees and curricular groups may also have a role to play in speaking to how these points get communicated. Again, just my anecdotal sort of opinion without having spent too much time in K to 12 as a teacher myself. Yixin, I hope I said that correctly. You mentioned sometimes people become performative when it comes to pursuing equity. I'm aware there is always a gap between knowing and taking action. What is the thing that you are most proud of when addressing equity and diversity issues? I personally, well, I mean, I can't speak for Hassan. I don't take pride in it as such. I just feel that I have a responsibility as an educator to ensure that everybody who may come into my space feels comfortable, safe, welcome, and encouraged to achieve their fullest potential relative to their own goals and relative to the curricula and standards that are established. So honestly, I just feel like I'm sort of doing my own due diligence here when it comes to that kind of thing. And pride doesn't really enter into it, is all. It's just kind of a function of being an educator in contemporary Canada. Again, my thoughts. I'm not speaking for anybody else. Jinghan, how can we support those who are feeling oppressed to have the courage to speak up and let others know about their story? Absolutely. I think institutions and individual educators have a lot to do with setting the tone for what goes on in the classroom. So when it comes to just having good language in terms of addressing people, in terms of having a framework to ensure a wide variety of inputs. So, for instance, giving students the chance to, it sort of comes down, I think, to almost a matter of universal design for living, universal design for learning, rather, wherein those kinds of interventions, such as providing a wide variety of assignment options, class participation options, whether in person or through online and or hybrid environments, um, all of those things require nuance and sensitivity and training and professional development. Let's not forget that. I feel like I could go on this particular question a little bit more, so maybe we'll just leave it at that for now. Again, really good question. Shunyan, it would be valuable to hear from Dr. Stranick and Dr. Arf regarding specific research issues that an educational researcher could explore for their own professional growth in the context of self-discovery. That's a great question. That's a great thought. I personally am not involved in educational research, haven't been for a while. I sort of make my position now as an educator and practitioner. And while I do have a PhD and while I have carried out a study and contributed to studies vis-a-vis peer-reviewed journals, I definitely wouldn't qualify what I do as a researcher. And I think just because of Hassan's efforts and background, I know he hasn't studied education formally, right? He's gone into law and other things. So that being said, I think anything you can do for professional growth and self-discovery. If you were in the post-secondary world, I would say go to your teaching and learning center, go to your professional development unit within your organization, or whoever is assigned, even if it's somebody associated with the human resources department, who oversees training and professional learning and professional development relative to the role which you are in. And absolutely, that person or persons or organization should be able to give you some appropriate strategies which will be suitable for your context and setting. Again, sorry for the kind of generic answer, but that's just speaking to my experience. Mani, we have a couple questions here. Given the evolving nature of diversity and inclusion efforts, how do Dr. Stranick and Dr. Arf recommend staying updated on best practices and adapting strategies to effectively meet the needs of diverse student populations? Again, I think I'll just sort of defer to what I spoke to in the previous question, checking in with your professional development unit and or teaching and learning advisor group or groups within your institution or setting is probably the best way to go for that, simply because they will have access to local resources which may not even necessarily be public. In terms of public resources, I would suggest going to the peer-reviewed literature, the educational literature, which I'm sure you're already getting some familiarity and experience with Dr. Gurney in her classes. And I would suggest further that whatever your disciplinary orientation, right, whatever your teachable subject is, probably if you put in a sort of advanced or highly specified kind of search within library, university, or public library resources, or even Google Scholar, honestly, you'll be able to find EDI resources and accounts of practice and accounts of study, which can inform your practice. All of that is really, I think, found quite well in professional journals. And that's what I would suggest. Haven't done the research on that myself, right? I hope that's been clear that myself, Hassan, and Doug, as well as others involved in this podcast, really are speaking from our experience as well as what we find in the literature as we go to the literature. And the last question from Manny before I'll segue into the next video. How do we ensure that policymakers are receptive to the perspective and needs of rural communities? Policymakers. Okay. Policymakers in Canada, I feel, is a sort of reference to elected government officials. I will spare you my extreme cynicism about the fact that education does not ever seem to resonate as a important issue for political parties who ultimately are elected and then fill the policymaker positions. This is where an activist standpoint or a politically engaged standpoint from the grassroots, so to speak, can be helpful. This is something where individual teachers, educators, schools, and community members have the opportunity to individually and collectively express their positions and their concerns to those individuals who either elected or at the appointment of elected officials. Because honestly, unless there's the explicit motivation, shall we say, to satisfy those concerns, sometimes out of concern out of not being elected again or losing their patronage appointment, you're talking about the grassroots trying to influence the upper levels, and that is a collective effort. And I'd really, if you want to go deep on that subject, I think a good starting point would be to examine generally the career and works of Paulo Freire, who is known for, among many other things, Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Pedagogy of the Heart, and a lot of other really important contemporary educational works. I'll probably leave that settle for now, and I'm going to jump into the other video. Thanks a lot for the awesome questions.